Hello, everyone. This is a special little interlude episode of Against Everyone with Connor Habib to introduce you to my novel, Hawk Mountain, which comes out in July. I'm so excited that this book is coming out, and I, in some ways, can't believe that I am talking publicly about a novel that I have coming out. And that's because I've always wanted to be a novelist, always, since I was a little kid. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to obviously talk about the book and how it developed. I'm going to read a bit of the book to you, which is a first also. I've not read this publicly before, of course. And I'm going to tell you how to pre-order it so you can get it as soon as it comes out and why that's important. And I'm also going to tell you about what an absolute lifelong hero of mine said about the book. It's something that floored me and is still got me reeling. Look, Hawk Mountain is, well, in short, it's a story of brutality, desire, love, and murder about a single father reuniting with his high school bully 15 years after they've graduated. They haven't seen each other that whole time. It's psychological fiction laced with high tension. You could call it literary horror. You could call it, thriller with a literary bent, in the sort of tradition of Patricia Highsmith. I'll go into it a bit more. Of course, I'm going to tell you what the book is about just before I read to you. And my lifelong obsession with horror novels, I'll tell you about that. But I also am going to tell you about pre-orders, and I think I should probably just do this first so you can listen to this and order the book and then listen to the rest, which is going to be, I think, more interesting to listen to, but the pre-orders are as important as that part. And I'm just going to tell you why real quickly. So the pre-orders are like when you're not an author, no one tells you how important pre-orders are. You just see authors on Twitter that are like, please buy, pre-order my book from Amazon or whatever. But then when you are an author, they tell you, the publisher tells you, and you're like, oh shit, this is actually really important. So you now have to tell everybody that it's important or make it seem important. So I'm just going to break it down for you in like 2 minutes before we get on to the meat of this episode, which is introducing Hawk Mountain to you. When you pre-order Hawk Mountain, which is a debut novel, so this is especially true of debut novels, you boost the first week of sales. So pre-order books are tacked on to the first week of sales figures, which are huge in how much publicity and promotion the book gets. You end up getting a lot of the right people to talk about the book, essentially. This includes distributors, publishers in foreign countries, the media, and, you can see where this is going. So by the time Hawk Mountain gets into your hands, if there's strong pre-sales, it enters into the world, like dancing and screeching or whatever. It makes a big debut. When you pre-order Hawk Mountain, it means that you get bookstores and organizations and institutions interested in events with me, which means that there's a better chance that I'll come to your town. There is a book tour coming, by the way, this summer, and I'm so excited to tell you about that. I'll tell you where I'm going to be. But see, look, if there's strong pre-sales and I'm not coming to your city right away, it means that there can be another tour and that there can be a tour when the paperback comes out and et cetera, et cetera. And it just means that it's more likely that I'll be at literary festivals and that kind of stuff. Also, the most obvious is that you get the book right away, like right away, the day it comes out with some of the sites that I'm going to tell you about. So if you go to patreon.com/Connor Habib, patreon.com/Connor Habib, there's a whole post about this sort of interlude episode about Hawk Mountain, and I'll have all the links that you can go to pre-order. You can also go to connorhabib.com/Hawk Mountain, and that'll have all the pre-order info as well. But basically, just to conclude, pre-orders have a huge effect on raising the profile of the book. So I'm just going to tell you how to do that a little bit more at the end of the episode. But now, what is Hawk Mountain about? Hawk Mountain centers around two men. There is Todd and Jack. And Todd and Jack went to school together, and Jack relentlessly bullied Todd. And 15 years later, after graduation, they haven't seen each other this whole time, Todd is on the beach in New England. His son Anthony is playing in the water, and Todd sees a figure walking up along the beach. So here, I'm going to read to you what happens from there to the end of that chapter. This is the first reading of Hawk Mountain. Todd opened his eyes. Squinting through his sun-blindness, then shielding his eyes with a saluting hand on his brow, he saw that the man walking along the water was standing now by Anthony. Todd felt a lurch in his stomach. He didn't want to cry out yet, didn't want to display panic and make Anthony afraid of everyone who approached. But that was the way Todd felt when he saw this figure, tan, golden-haired, tall, talking to his son. Menace. He watched and tried to slow his heart, go out to him, but he didn't. It wasn't like the man would just carry him away. Not like he would, drown his son? Hold him under for the pleasure of it? He had to remind himself that those things didn't happen. Mostly, they didn't happen. The man looked over his shoulder up toward Todd. He looked for a long time as if trying to settle something. Then he started walking up the sand. The sun was behind him. The light was like a crown, so bright that it obscured his visage. Closer. Todd stood up. Closer. Anthony was standing in the distance now, looking at them both. Closer. Closer. Until here he was, standing above Todd, and was only in the absence of the sun when the stranger's head had blocked it out completely and forced Todd into shadow, that Todd could see who it was. He was different, of course, 15 years later, but unmistakable. His body had been pulled taller with time and into light muscles. The same swipe of freckles on his face was darkened by the summer, and his hair had leaned away from blonde toward light brown. His chest was smooth, and his legs were sparsely covered with a rush of golden hairs. His eyes were still the same color green, clear but opaque, like cracked sea glass. Jack opened his mouth to say something, but stopped. The waves rolled in once more, and then he laughed. "No fucking way. I knew it," he said. His voice was delighted. Todd couldn't speak. Jack sat down on the sand next to his towel. His bare feet were covered in coagulated sand that followed him up from the shoreline. "Don't pretend you don't know," he said. He was smiling in a happy, challenging way. There was a gap between his two front teeth. They said his name at the same time. "Jack?" Todd said in a vulnerable tone. "Jack!" Jack exclaimed. Then he leaned and knelt into Todd, hugging him. Their bare chests were touching, and Todd wondered if Jack could feel his heart racing. Or maybe that was Jack's heart. Or maybe that was both of them, filling in each other's beats. Maybe it was both of them at once. "I saw that kid. That's your son, isn't it? I guess I was all wrong about you," Jack began laughing. "Yes, that's wrong about me? A kid. I saw that kid and I knew. Anthony. He looks just like Todd Naska is the first thing I thought. Like a mini Todd Naska. And then I saw you. Hey, are you married too? Do you live here?" Everything had been so quiet a moment before, and now the ocean, it seemed, had caught up with him. Memory was alive in him again, and he felt the impulse to leave, to get in the car, to drive, to not come back to New Graynard, to go get Anthony first, of course to get his son, then to flee. He would answer Jack's questions one by one, he guessed, one at a time, but Jack was hugging him again, and Todd could feel the light and warmth in his skin. "It's so weird when you see someone out of place, you know," Jack said. "Like, you could see your worst enemy where you live and hate them. But if you saw them, say, in Florida, you'd go up and you'd say hi." "Are we enemies then?" Todd thought. "Still?" "Sorry, I'm talking too much," Jack said. "Okay, so do you live here?" Todd took a breath. "We do. You and Anthony!" Todd yelled at the water, and Anthony, obedient, started to make his way back up to them, slowly swinging his arms dramatically along the way. "Are you married?" "No, and..." Todd added hurriedly, "Can you not talk about that when he gets up here? He doesn't really know his mother." "Accident?" Jack asked. "No, I wanted..." But then Anthony was there, and he stood behind his father like a fawn behind a doe. Jack, this is Anthony, Todd said. Pleased to meet you, Jack said. Again. He put his hand out, but Anthony didn't take it. Are you my dad's friend? Anthony asked. For a moment, there was no answer. Well, what happens after that? Well, Jack asks, for complicated reasons, can I stay with you, Todd? And Todd, for complicated reasons, says yes. But then Jack stays and stays and won't leave. And Todd thinks, you have to leave. You have to leave. And Jack gets closer and closer to Todd's son. They start developing a relationship. And then a little ways in, something horrible happens, horrific. And from there, the novel spirals out and gets very, very dark. So, where did this come from? I mean, we can go back. I have always, or almost always, wanted to be a writer. I was reading a book when I was 7 or 8, and I remember it began with this epic fight scene. It was a fantasy novel, like a Dungeons and Dragons novel, actually. And I set it down, I stood up, and I went to the Apple IIc that my mom had, and I started writing a novel. I wrote 10 or 20 pages of this, absolutely terrible, of course, fantasy novel. Maybe not so bad for a 7 or 8-year-old, I don't know. And, yeah. And then after that, I started writing horror and reading horror. I never really stopped writing horror since that moment, or writing at all. I, in the meantime, though, growing up, was, in Pennsylvania, in suburban / rural / post-industrial Pennsylvania, which was its own sort of horror. It was this conservative, anti-intellectual, homophobic, racist place. Which is not really great, growing up as a kid with, big political, theoretical ideas, who's gay and whose dad is from Syria. I was surrounded by all that. And I would write these books about violence and fear and repression, or parts of them anyway. And when I would write them, I would also make these fake book covers for a lot of them. And I would write author blurbs on the backs of these covers. I guess maybe I was kind of manifesting or something when I was a kid without realizing that I was doing that. But I would write the author blurbs on the back of the covers. I would draw the covers because I love to draw as well. And I would write, real authors' names underneath the blurbs. And Stephen King, Clive Barker, whatever. Anyway, listen, it's almost impossible each day for me to believe now what has happened, now that Hawk Mountain is coming out, which is that I wrote this literary horror novel, and in November of last year, I got an email with this blurb. I'm going to read the blurb, and then I'll say who it's from. To tell a story as rich and resonant as Conor Habib's Hawk Mountain, and achieve it with such structural simplicity is no small achievement. The book has you in its arms in a heartbeat and never lets you slip. The chapters are short and muscular, the dialogue spare, the descriptive passages lingering not a syllable beyond their function. Scoured of comfort, the novel neither prettifies or demeans, it simply tells the truth. Yet as the narrative gains momentum, its profundity comes clear. We have been drawn into an emotional maze which will defy the comfort of resolution all the way to its last exchange. Out of the defiantly plain way in which the story advances, a rare beauty is born, bringing us to the book's close all the more persuaded that we've comprehended some kind of truth, because the teller of the tale has no tricks up his sleeve, only the wise, sad certainty of what living has shown him, which here he shares. It's a great blurb, and it's from Clive Barker. And I've been reading Clive's books since, I can't remember how long. Since way back then, since high school, certainly middle school, I'm sure. Books of Blood, The Hellbound Heart, The Thief of Always. The Great and Secret Show, Weave World, Imagica, everything I could get my hands on by this guy. He is the greatest horror writer and fantasist. I mean, it just is mind-blowing. So the publisher sent him a copy, and he loved it, and he sent that to me. And now the blurb we have on the book from Clive is briefer. Clive supplied a concise blurb as well, in case we just wanted a one sentence, and that's what's on the back of the book, which is Conor Habib's debut novel is a bleak, dark adrenaline rush, which I also love. Oh, it's so personal for me. It's so personal for me to receive praise from someone that I love so much, whose work has shaped my thinking and my imagination so much. And also for this book, because with this book, I wanted to show the two ways horror was developing for me. In those books, including Clive's book, but also horror by Stephen King and Harlan Ellison and lesser-known writers, but also, you know, what it was like to grow up, where I grew up, that kind of horror. And I wanted to put that in a feeling. I think when people try to chronicle a feeling of difference, and in my case, one of the big feelings was this like sexual silence and, you know, the fear and the shame and all that kind of stuff. So when people try to chronicle, say, gay life, they take it head on. Like they'll show a great gay person growing up and his trials and tribulations. And I think some of those books are great, but they're documents, chronological documents of things happening. They're depicting on kind of a familiar canvas that works mostly if it's relatable in some way. I wanted to write a book that wasn't necessarily about creating something relatable, but rather would shock a feeling into the reader, to connect to and convey a feeling or an experience that's unique to a certain kind of growing up. So there wouldn't have to be any identification with a character, or worse, a sort of forced or vague sympathy for someone with an identity or a sexuality that was not the reader's own. I wanted instead to inspire the sort of dread and tension and fear and sadness and frustration that all form one feeling that people like me who grew up like I did have. I want to inspire that in others, because otherwise it's just not conveyable. I don't think I could have shown it by just chronicling someone's life. And it seems to have done the trick. You know, on top of that, I just find myself really connected to writers like Patricia Highsmith and Rainer Werner Fassbinder, who show the way that love and hate are so intertwined. And that's something that shows up in this book. That to encounter love, that there's a freedom there. And when there's freedom, there's always the possibility for chaos, for making the wrong or violent or cruel decision, for hurting someone or yourself. Like, love is a tension that has to be held long enough for it to start really growing. And if you try to force it, something desperate and terrible can take place. Like if you push just a little too hard one way or the other, something can shatter and become jagged and brutal. And Hawk Mountain, you know, first came out of this sort of melodramatic impulse that I had when I was reading Patricia Highsmith novels a lot when I was in grad school, and I wrote a 50-page story that nobody liked. And the professor didn't even want to comment on. She just didn't like it enough. And then I just kept thinking about these two guys and also the kid. I just kept thinking about them for years and years and years. And so I kept trying to think, what am I going to do with them? And then one day I sat down and I started writing. And about 7 months later, the novel was done. And that was that. So that's it, friends. It's a long journey from being that kid making those book covers and writing these clunky horror novel attempts of a few pages on my mom's Apple IIc, to writing a story in grad school that nobody wanted to read, to now having this book out essentially, 15 years later, just like the 15 years between graduation and Todd and Jack reuniting, 15 years later, so to becoming a novel, and that novel can be in your hands in July. It's Hawk Mountain, and I'm so excited to share it with you. I can't wait for you to read it. So you can link to the pre-orders through my Patreon, and please do that for all the reasons I listed. So you can go to patreon.com/Connor Habib or Connor Habib /Hawk Mountain. There's an Amazon link. So obviously you can order it from Amazon, pre-order from Amazon. There's a link there, and that'll get it to you right away. The day of publication usually. There's bookshop.org, and I really like them. So bookshop.org, they will source it from an indie bookstore that's close to you, and then you'll get it in your hands. It's usually the same amount of time as Amazon. Not always, but like 99% of the time. And then, you can get it from Barnes & Noble or IndieBound. I put links to those too. And Hudson, I put that in there. That's like the airport bookseller, because I don't know. I always think it's cool to go to the airport and see the books. And I'm just like, man, if a lot of people ordered from airport booksellers, like it would just be at airports, and that's cool. People would be reading on planes, being sort of horrified on their, getaways to Bali or whatever. But I think Amazon or bookshop.org is really the best one. And that'll get the book to you July 5 or right around then if you're in the US. If you're in Ireland or the UK or Australia, there's bookshop.uk, which is bookshop.org in the UK. And I also have a link for a local bookstore here in Dublin if you're in Ireland and you're listening, Gutter Bookshop, which you can order signed copies from. That is just kind of an Ireland only thing. But remember, there's a tour coming. You get the book, you meet me at the reading or the event, and I'll sign the book. I'll say hi. It'll be a great time. And you can say, hey, I listened to that episode. And I'll give you a high five, and we'll throw confetti. I don't know. I'm just going on and on. Anyway, thank you so much for listening to all this. Please pre-order the book, but also I really hope you enjoy the book. Thanks. Bye now.